Pack your things. I don't need you here anymore. Those were the first words my husband said to me the morning after he got promoted. For a second, I honestly thought he was joking. 3 years earlier, he had lost his job without warning. While he sat at home sending out resumes and fighting depression, I picked up a second job. I worked mornings at a medical billing office and evenings stocking shelves at a grocery store. Some nights I came home, so exhausted that I fell asleep in my work clothes. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself this was what marriage was supposed to be. Every paycheck I earned kept a roof over our heads. Every sacrifice I made was for us, or at least, that's what I believed. Then one promotion changed everything. If you've ever sacrificed everything for someone you love, tell me, what would you have done in my place? And before we begin, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. I'd love to see how many of you are here from across the US or anywhere else in the world. If stories about love, betrayal, and family mean something to you, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more real-life inspired stories. Now let me take you back to the day everything started, long before my husband looked me in the eyes and told me to leave my own home. Pack your things. I don't need you here anymore. My husband's voice was calm. Too calm. He didn't yell. He didn't slam the door. He simply stood in our living room wearing the same navy blue suit he had proudly worn to work the day before, his first day after getting promoted. In one hand, he held a cup of coffee. In the other, the handle of my suitcase. For a moment, I honestly thought he was joking. Then he rolled the suitcase toward me. I've already changed the security code, he said. Take what you need today. My throat tightened. I looked around the house. The same house whose mortgage I had helped pay every single month. The same kitchen where I packed his lunches. The same couch where I rubbed his shoulders after another rejection email during the months he couldn't find work. Nothing in the room looked different. But suddenly, it didn't feel like my home anymore. If you've ever given everything to someone you loved, tell me, what would you have done if you were standing where I was? And before we continue, let me know where you're watching from. I always love seeing people from all across America and around the world sharing their stories in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoy emotional stories inspired by real life. Now, let me take you back to where this really began. 3 years earlier, life wasn't perfect, but it was ours. My husband, Ethan, worked as a project coordinator for a logistics company outside Columbus, Ohio. I worked full-time as a medical billing specialist at a local clinic. We weren't rich. We weren't struggling either. Our little 2-story house wasn't fancy, but every picture hanging on the wall represented another memory we'd built together. Every Friday night we'd order pizza. Sunday mornings were for grocery shopping together. We used to laugh over stupid reality TV shows. Back then, I believe we were a team. Everything changed on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. Ethan came home 3 hours earlier than usual. He didn't say a word. He walked straight past me, loosened his tie, and sat at the kitchen table staring at the floor. I poured him a cup of coffee. Long day. He didn't answer. Instead, he slid a white envelope across the table. Layoff notice. Company restructuring. Effective immediately. I watched the color disappear from his face. I don't know what I'm supposed to do, he whispered. I reached across the table and held his hand. We'll figure it out. And I meant every word. The first few weeks weren't terrible. He updated his resume, applied for dozens of jobs, spent hours on LinkedIn, prepared for interviews. Every rejection hurt him a little more. After 3 months, the confident man I married barely recognized himself. He stopped shaving every day, stopped calling friends, stopped leaving the house unless he absolutely had to. Some mornings, he'd still be sitting in the same chair when I came home from work. I knew he wasn't lazy. He was ashamed. One evening I found him staring at our checking account. We're going to run out of money. I sat beside him. We won't. How? I'll pick up more hours. He looked at me immediately. No. I can do it. You already work full-time. I'll manage. He shook his head. I can't let you do that. I smiled even though I already knew my decision. This isn't about pride anymore. It's about us. The following Monday, I accepted a second job stocking shelves at a grocery store 4 evenings a week. My schedule became brutal. Clinic from 8 a.m. until 5 p.m. Quick dinner in the car. Grocery store from 6 p.m. until almost midnight. Then home, laundry, bills, 4 or 5 hours of sleep. Repeat. Every paycheck went toward our mortgage, utilities, insurance, groceries, and keeping Ethan from feeling like he had failed his family. Whenever he apologized, I'd kiss his forehead. We're partners. I've got you. I believed those words with all my heart. I had no idea that one day, those same sacrifices would become the very reason he believed he no longer needed me. For the next several months, my life became a routine of exhaustion. The alarm rang every morning at 5:30. By 6, I was already packing lunch for both of us while checking the bills spread across the kitchen counter. The mortgage, electricity, car insurance, health insurance. Every envelope felt heavier than the last. I never let Ethan see how nervous I really was. Instead, I'd smile. We're okay. Those 2 words became my daily lie. At the clinic, I worked through lunch almost every day just to earn overtime. My coworkers noticed. Emily, one of the nurses asked one afternoon, when was the last time you actually took a break? I laughed. I'll rest when life slows down. She smiled politely, but I could tell she didn't believe me. Honestly, neither did I. By 6 in the evening, I'd change into my grocery store uniform in the employee restroom. My feet already hurt before my second shift even started. For 6 hours, I'd stock canned food, bottled water, frozen dinners, and cereal while listening to customers complain about things that suddenly felt so small. Sometimes I'd catch my reflection in the freezer doors, dark circles under my eyes, hair tied back without much care, hands rough from constantly opening cardboard boxes. I barely recognized myself anymore. Still, every time I drove home after midnight, I reminded myself why I was doing it. For us. Always for us. Ethan tried. I want to be fair about that. Every morning he searched job boards. He attended interviews, updated his resume again and again. Whenever his phone rang, I'd silently pray it was finally good news. Most of the time, it wasn't. We'd decided to move forward with another candidate. Those words slowly chipped away at the man I married. Little by little, he stopped talking about the future. Then he stopped talking about anything at all. One Saturday, I found him sitting alone on the back porch. Snow had begun to fall. He wasn't wearing a jacket, just staring into the yard. I don't know who I am anymore, he said quietly. I sat beside him. You are still my husband. I can't even provide. Providing isn't only about money. He shook his head. You deserve better. No. I squeezed his hand. I deserve you. He looked at me with tears in his eyes. For a moment, I thought love was enough. Money stayed tight. So I quietly began making sacrifices Ethan never knew about. I canceled my gym membership, stopped getting my hair done. I skipped buying new clothes, even when my work shoes started falling apart. I packed leftovers for lunch every single day. When friends invited me out for dinner, I always had the same excuse. Maybe next time. There was never going to be a next time. One evening, my younger sister, Rachel, stopped by unexpectedly. She looked around the kitchen. You've lost weight. I've just been busy. She frowned. Emily, are you eating enough? I laughed it off. I'm fine. She opened the refrigerator. There wasn't much inside. Milk, eggs, some vegetables, a few containers of leftovers. Rachel closed the door slowly. You don't have to pretend with me. I'm not pretending. You shouldn't have to carry all of this by yourself. I'm not. She looked toward the living room where Ethan was sitting silently with his laptop. Then she looked back at me. I hope he knows how lucky he is. I smiled. He does. At least, I thought he did. Months passed. Our savings account disappeared. Then my emergency fund. Then the small investment account my parents had encouraged me to build years ago. Every time I transferred money, I told myself the same thing. We'll rebuild it together. One night, while paying bills online, I noticed something strange. There was a charge on our credit card I didn't recognize. Just under $200. A men's clothing store. I assumed Ethan needed a suit for interviews. The following week, another purchase. Then another. Shoes. Dress shirts. A professional haircut. When I asked him about it, he smiled for the first time in weeks. I've got several final interviews coming up. Relief washed over me. Really? He nodded. I don't want to get my hopes up yet. I wrapped my arms around him. This is it. I can feel it. For the first time in almost a year, I truly believed our nightmare was finally coming to an end. I had no idea. The first real change in our lives had already begun, and I completely misunderstood what it meant. A week later, Ethan walked through the front door with something I hadn't seen in over a year. A smile. A real one. I got it. For a second, I just stared at him. What? The job. I dropped the grocery bags onto the kitchen floor. You got the job? He laughed. I got the job. I threw my arms around him, so hard that we almost fell over. We did it, I whispered through tears. He hugged me back. For the first time in what felt like forever, I believe our lives were finally beginning again. That night, we celebrated with takeout from the little Italian restaurant we used to visit on our anniversaries. It wasn't expensive. Actually, we probably couldn't afford it, but neither of us cared. This is just the beginning, Ethan said as he raised his glass of iced tea. Things are finally going to get better. I smiled. I never stopped believing in you. He reached across the table and squeezed my hand. I'll never forget everything you've done for me. Those words settled deep into my heart. If only they had stayed true. The new job changed Ethan almost immediately. At first, it was in all the right ways. He woke up early again, started shaving every morning. He laughed more. He even began making breakfast on weekends. Watching him slowly come back to life made every exhausting shift I'd worked feel worth it. After his first paycheck, he insisted on paying for dinner. My turn, he said with a grin. I teased him. I was starting to think you forgot your wallet existed. He laughed louder than I had heard in years. For a little while, it felt like we had survived the storm. 3 months later, Ethan's company announced a major restructuring. One Friday evening, he burst through the front door carrying a small box. I got promoted. I wrapped my arms around him. Oh my God, Ethan. He lifted me off the floor, laughing. They promoted me to operations manager. That's incredible. It comes with a huge raise. I cried before he did. Not because of the money, because I believed every sacrifice had finally meant something. We're going to pay off the credit cards, I said excitedly, and rebuild our savings. We can finally take that vacation we kept postponing. We should replace your old car. I kept talking, planning, dreaming, building a future in my head. Ethan simply smiled. Yeah, we'll see. I barely noticed how strangely he answered. His promotion brought changes I hadn't expected. New clothes, more expensive suits, a luxury watch, business dinners, networking events, weekend conferences. At first, all of it sounded perfectly reasonable. His new position came with more responsibility. That's what I kept telling myself. Then, his phone became part of his hand. Every notification made him turn the screen away from me. If I walked into the room unexpectedly, he'd lock it before setting it down. Everything okay? I asked one night. Just work. Looks busy. It is. I nodded. I trusted him. Why wouldn't I? One Saturday morning, I offered to wash his work clothes while he mowed the lawn. As I reached into the pocket of one of his suit jackets, I found a folded receipt. A high-end steakhouse downtown. 2 dinners. 2 desserts. A bottle of wine. The total was almost $300. The date? Wednesday night. He had told me he was working late in the office. When he came back inside, I held up the receipt. Looks like your company dinners are getting pretty fancy. He glanced at it for barely a second. Oh, that. It was with a client. You said you were at the office. We started there. Then everyone went out. I smiled. Sounds like they're treating you well. They are. He kissed my forehead. I've got to shower. As he walked upstairs, something felt off. Not enough to accuse him. Not enough to start a fight. Just different. Over the next few weeks, little things kept happening. Nothing dramatic. Nothing anyone else would notice. He started wearing a new cologne, one I had never bought him. He began going to the gym before work. His barber appointments doubled. He answered work calls by stepping outside. One evening, while folding laundry, I noticed a tiny stain of lipstick near the collar of one of his white shirts. A soft pink color. I stared at it for nearly a minute. Then I quietly carried the shirt to the washing machine. Maybe someone at work hugged him. Maybe it happened by accident. Maybe I was simply exhausted and imagining things. That night, I lay awake beside him, listening to his breathing, trying to convince myself that trust meant choosing not to fear the worst. I didn't realize that while I was searching for signs of another woman, I was completely overlooking something far more important. And that hidden truth would change everything I thought I knew about my husband. By the time Ethan had been in his new position for 4 months, our lives looked perfect from the outside. Our credit card debt was shrinking. The mortgage was finally current. Friends congratulated us on making it through the hard times. They smiled whenever they saw us together. If anyone deserves a happy ending, it's you too. I smiled back every single time. No one knew how often I now ate dinner alone. Ethan was working later than ever. At least, that's what he told me. Monday, late meeting. Tuesday, client dinner. Wednesday, regional conference call. Thursday, team building event. Friday, drinks with executives. There was always a reason, always an explanation, and every explanation sounded believable. One evening I stayed awake until almost 1 in the morning waiting for him. When I heard his car pull into the driveway, I quickly wiped away the tears I hadn't realized were falling. He walked inside looking exhausted. "I'm sorry," he said. "It was another crazy day." I forced a smile. "I kept dinner warm. I'm not hungry." He kissed the top of my head. "I'm going straight to bed." Less than 2 minutes later, his phone buzzed upstairs, then buzzed again, and again. The next morning, while loading the dishwasher, I heard laughter coming from the patio. Ethan was outside, talking on the phone. I couldn't hear every word, only pieces. "No, she doesn't know. We'll figure it out. Just give me a little more time." When he walked back inside, he nearly jumped after seeing me. "Oh, I didn't know you were home. I forgot my lunch." He nodded quickly. "Everything okay?" "Yeah. Who were you talking to?" "A client." "So early." "They're on the East Coast." I blinked. "We're in Ohio." He froze for half a second, then laughed. "I meant one of our New York offices." It sounded reasonable. Still, something about the hesitation stayed with me. That weekend, my sister Rachel invited us to a neighborhood barbecue. Ethan almost declined. "I've got work." "You work every weekend now," I said. "It's important." Rachel overheard us. She looked directly at Ethan. "One afternoon won't destroy your career." He reluctantly agreed. At the barbecue, everyone wanted to hear about his promotion. "So, operations manager?" one neighbor asked. "That's impressive." Ethan smiled proudly. "I've been lucky." I stood beside him feeling proud too. Then Rachel quietly leaned toward me. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Have you noticed," she hesitated, "that Ethan doesn't really look at you anymore?" I laughed. "What?" "I'm serious. He talks to everyone else. But every time you speak, he seems distracted." I looked across the yard. Ethan was laughing with another couple. I waited for him to glance my way. He never did. "You're imagining things," I told her. "I hope I am." A few days later, I stopped by Ethan's office without telling him. I wanted to surprise him with lunch. The receptionist smiled politely. "Can I help you?" "I'm here to see Ethan Carter." She checked her computer. "Oh, he isn't here today." I frowned. "Is he working from home?" "No. He left after this morning's meeting. He had an off-site appointment." "What kind of appointment?" "I'm sorry. I don't have that information." I thanked her and walked back to my car. Maybe he had forgotten to tell me. Maybe. As I started the engine, my phone vibrated. It was Ethan. "Hey, everything okay?" "Yeah. I was just checking on you." "You sound busy." "I am. I'm still at the office." For a moment, I couldn't speak. He continued talking, complaining about paperwork, about meetings, about deadlines, all while I sat in the company parking lot, looking directly at the building he claimed he was inside. I almost confronted him. Almost. Instead, I simply said, "I love you." There was a long pause. Then he answered quietly, "Love you too." He hung up first. That night I couldn't sleep. Not because I thought he was having an affair. Oddly enough, that wasn't what bothered me most anymore. It was the lying. Small lies. Pointless lies. The kind that slowly poison trust. I opened our online banking app, hoping paying a few bills would distract me. Instead, I noticed something unusual. Several cash withdrawals. $500. Then another $400. Then $600. None of them matched any bills we paid. None of them were discussed. When Ethan came out of the shower, I asked as casually as I could, "Did you take cash out this week?" He didn't even look at the screen. "Probably." "For what?" "I don't remember." "You withdrew almost $1,500 this month." His expression changed for only a second. Then he smiled. "Business expenses. Your company doesn't reimburse those?" "They will." I nodded slowly. The answer sounded practiced. Almost. Too practiced. As he turned off the bedroom light, I realized something that terrified me. For months, I had been searching for proof that my husband was cheating, but every new clue seemed to point toward something much bigger. I just couldn't figure out what it was. The next morning, I called in sick for the first time in almost 2 years. Not because I was ill, because I couldn't ignore the feeling growing inside me anymore. I needed answers. Real ones. After Ethan left for work, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop, a notebook, and every bank statement I could download. For nearly 3 hours, I highlighted every unusual transaction. Cash withdrawals, restaurant bills, parking garages downtown, a few purchases at stores I had never heard of. None of it proved anything. But together, it painted a picture I couldn't quite understand. Then my phone rang. It was Rachel. "You don't sound like yourself." "I didn't go to work." "What happened?" I hesitated before telling her everything. The phone calls, the lies, the cash, the office visit, the missing hours. When I finished, there was silence. Finally, she asked the question I had been avoiding. "Emily, do you think he's seeing someone else?" I closed my eyes. "I don't know, but I'm starting to think I don't know my husband anymore." 2 days later, I did something I never imagined I would do. I followed him. The entire drive, I kept hoping I would feel ridiculous, that I'd discover he really was working late, that I could laugh at myself for being paranoid. Instead, he drove past his office, past downtown, past the interstate. He finally pulled into the parking lot of a small cafe on the edge of the city. I parked across the street. 5 minutes later, a woman walked toward him. She looked to be in her early 30s. Professional, confident. She smiled the moment she saw him. Then, she hugged him. Not a quick handshake. Not the kind of hug coworkers usually share. A long embrace. The kind that made my stomach drop. I couldn't breathe. They walked inside together, laughing, talking. She reached across the table more than once. He smiled in a way I hadn't seen at home for months. I sat frozen inside my car. Every explanation I defended, every excuse I'd made, every benefit of the doubt. It all collapsed in front of me. By the time they walked back outside, nearly 90 minutes later, I was crying so hard I could barely see through the windshield. Rachel had been right. Everyone had been right. I was simply the last person willing to admit it. That evening, Ethan came home carrying flowers. White lilies. My favorite. I thought we could have dinner together tonight. I stared at the bouquet. My hands refused to take it. "What's wrong?" "You tell me." He frowned. "What does that mean?" "I know." His face changed instantly. "I don't know what you're talking about." "I saw you." His shoulders stiffened. "You followed me." "I saw the woman." He looked away. For several long seconds, neither of us spoke. Finally, he sighed. "It's not what you think." I laughed. A broken laugh that didn't even sound like my own. "Really?" Because from where I was sitting, it looked exactly like what I think. He rubbed his forehead. "I can't explain right now." "When?" "Soon." "After you've lied again?" "No." "After you've met her again?" "It's complicated." "No, Ethan." I wiped away another tear. "It's actually very simple." "Are you in love with her?" He didn't answer. He simply stared at the floor. That silence felt louder than any confession. I packed a small overnight bag and drove to Rachel's house. She opened the door before I even knocked. The moment she saw my face, she hugged me. I knew it. So did I. I cried into her shoulder until there were no tears left. That night, lying awake in her guest room, I replayed every moment from the past year. The overtime, the second job, the skipped meals, the worn-out shoes, the birthdays we never celebrated, the vacations we canceled, every sacrifice, every promise, every "we'll get through this together." Had it all been for nothing? Around midnight, my phone buzzed. A message from Ethan. "Please don't make any decisions until you hear everything." I stared at the screen, then turned the phone face down. There was nothing left to hear. At least, that's what I believed. I had finally found the answer. Or so I thought. What I didn't realize was that the woman in the cafe was never the biggest secret my husband had been hiding. And the truth behind those lies would completely overturn everything I thought I had just uncovered. I stayed at Rachel's house for 3 days. During that time, Ethan called 12 times. He left 6 voicemails, sent countless text messages. I didn't answer a single one. As far as I was concerned, there was nothing left to discuss. I'd seen him with another woman. I'd caught him lying. Whatever explanation he had couldn't possibly erase that. By the 4th morning, I realized I couldn't stay hidden forever. I needed to go home, not to save my marriage, just to collect more clothes and decide what to do next. Rachel insisted on driving me. "If he starts making excuses," she said, gripping the steering wheel, "you don't owe him a conversation." "I know. And don't let him manipulate you." I nodded. At least, I thought I knew what to expect. I couldn't have been more wrong. When we pulled into the driveway, Ethan's car wasn't there. The house felt strangely quiet. Inside, everything looked exactly as I had left it, except for one thing. A large manila envelope sat on the dining room table. My name was written across the front. Emily. Nothing else. No note. No explanation. Just my name. Rachel looked at me. "Don't open it if you're not ready." But I already was. Inside were dozens of documents. Bank statements. Employment records. Mortgage paperwork. Insurance forms. At first, they made no sense. Then I noticed one folder labeled Emergency Financial Plan. I frowned. I'd never seen it before. Inside was a spreadsheet. Every dollar I had earned over the past 3 years was listed. So was every mortgage payment, every utility bill, every insurance payment, every grocery expense. Next to each item, someone had written the date it had been paid back. Paid back! My heartbeat quickened. I kept turning pages, one transfer after another. Amounts that matched the exact bills I had covered during Ethan's unemployment. Each transfer had already been scheduled into an investment account. An account with my name on it. "What is this?" Rachel whispered. I don't know." Then another document slipped onto the floor. It was from an investment firm. The balance made me stop breathing. Over $200,000. The account owner, Emily Carter. My hands began to shake. I'd never opened this account. I'd never even heard of it. At that moment, the front door opened. Ethan walked in. He froze when he saw us. "I was hoping you'd read everything." I stood up immediately. "What is this?" He looked at the papers scattered across the table. "It's yours." "My what?" "Your account." "I don't understand." "I know." He took a slow breath. "I never wanted you to find out this way." Rachel crossed her arms. "You've got a lot of explaining to do." He nodded. "I do." He looked at me. "The money you've been putting into this family, I've been paying back." I stared at him in disbelief. "What?" "Every mortgage payment you covered. Every bill. Every dollar. I tracked all of it." I laughed bitterly. "So this makes everything okay?" "No. It doesn't." "Then why?" He looked down for a long moment before answering. "Because I made you a promise." "What promise?" "The day I lost my job, I promised myself that if I ever got back on my feet, I would make sure every sacrifice you made for me was returned." I couldn't process what I was hearing. It sounded impossible. If that were true, then why all the lies? Why the secret meetings? Why the hidden cash withdrawals? Why make me believe he had another woman? Almost as if he had read my mind, he quietly said, "The woman you saw was never my girlfriend." My stomach tightened. "Then who is she?" He looked directly into my eyes. "She's an attorney." The room fell completely silent. Rachel and I exchanged confused glances. "An attorney?" I repeated. He nodded. "I hired her months ago." "To do what?" He swallowed hard. "To protect you." Nothing about his answer made sense. Not yet. But for the first time since this nightmare began, I realized something. The story I'd been telling myself was missing an entire chapter. And whatever Ethan was about to reveal would force me to question every conclusion I'd made since the day I followed him to that cafe. I stared at Ethan, waiting for him to say something that finally made sense. "An attorney? To protect me?" None of it fit the story I had been living for the past several months. "What are you talking about?" I asked. "The woman at the cafe." He nodded. "Her name is Olivia. She's a family attorney." Rachel frowned. "Family attorney?" Ethan pulled out a chair but didn't sit. "I started meeting with her about 7 months ago." My heart sank. "So you were planning to divorce me?" "No. I was trying to make sure that if something happened to me, you would never have to struggle again." The room fell silent. "What does that mean?" I whispered. He looked away before answering. "Do you remember the executive physical my company required after my promotion?" I nodded. "Of course. You said everything was fine." I lied. Every muscle in my body froze. I had more tests. And then more. The doctors found something. He slowly reached into his briefcase and placed a thin medical folder on the table. My hands trembled as I opened it. CT scans, blood work, specialist reports. Then, the diagnosis: hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. I didn't understand the medical terms, but one sentence had been highlighted: high risk of sudden cardiac arrest. I looked up at him. "No, Ethan, no." I went to 3 different specialists, hoping one of them would tell me it was a mistake. They all said the same thing: "You could live 20 years. Or..." He couldn't finish the sentence. I felt the room spinning. So every late night wasn't work. Most of them were hospital appointments. And the others? Meetings with financial planners, insurance advisors, and Olivia. I couldn't speak. Rachel quietly stepped toward the window, giving us space. For the first time in days, I noticed how exhausted Ethan looked. Not tired, worn down, as if he'd been carrying something far heavier than work. "Why didn't you tell me?" The question barely came out as a whisper. "I wanted to, so many times. But every time I looked at you, I remembered those months when you worked yourself into exhaustion just to keep us alive. You finally had a chance to breathe. I couldn't destroy that. So instead, you let me believe you were cheating." His eyes filled with tears. "I thought that would be easier." I stared at him in disbelief. "Easier? If you hated me, I thought moving on would hurt less." Anger surged through me. "You don't get to decide how I heal." "I know. You don't get to choose my pain for me." "I know. You let me think our marriage was a lie." "I know." Every answer was the same. Not an excuse. Not an argument. Just, "I know." He opened another folder. "This is why I withdrew the cash." Inside were invoices, legal fees, estate planning, a living trust, life insurance updates, medical consultations. Everything had one purpose: protecting me, protecting our home, making sure I would never have to work 2 jobs again if the worst happened. Then I saw another document, a handwritten letter. My name was on the front. "Emily, when did you write this?" "A few months ago." "Read it." My fingers shook as I unfolded the paper. The first sentence stole the air from my lungs. "If you're reading this, it means I wasn't strong enough to tell you everything while I still had the chance." I stopped immediately. "I can't. Please. I don't want to. I know. But you deserve the truth." Tears blurred every word that followed. He wrote about watching me leave before sunrise every morning, about pretending to be asleep because he couldn't bear seeing how exhausted I was, about feeling like he'd stolen years of my life, about promising himself that if he ever recovered financially, he would spend the rest of his life paying me back. And if he didn't have the rest of his life, he wanted to leave me with enough security that I would never have to wonder how to pay another bill. By the time I reached the final page, I couldn't see through my tears. I looked up. "Ethan, why didn't you trust me?" He answered so quietly I almost didn't hear him. "Because I was terrified." "Terrified of what?" "That the moment you heard the diagnosis, you'd stop living your life and start spending every day waiting for me to die." The house became painfully quiet. 4 months. I had believed I was watching my husband slowly fall out of love with me. The truth was far crueler. He had been preparing me for a future he feared he might never get to see. But there was still one question I couldn't answer. If Ethan loved me enough to sacrifice his own reputation, why had he looked me in the eyes on the morning after his promotion, handed me a suitcase, and told me to leave? That moment still didn't make any sense. And somehow, I knew the answer to that question would change everything one last time. I couldn't stop thinking about it. Everything Ethan had told me explained the late-night meetings, the attorney, the hospital visits, the investment account, even the cash withdrawals. But none of it explained the one thing that haunted me more than anything else. The suitcase. The words he had said. Pack your things. I don't need you here anymore. I looked at him through tear-filled eyes. Why? Why would you do that to me? His shoulders dropped. I was hoping you wouldn't ask that until after you finished reading everything. I am asking. He nodded slowly. You deserve the truth. He walked upstairs and returned carrying a thin blue folder. Inside was a stack of papers. On top, a business card. The logo belonged to one of the largest law firms in Columbus. Beneath it was another document. A property appraisal. Then another. A purchase agreement. I frowned. What am I looking at? Ethan sat across from me. The house. What about it? I sold my share. I blinked. You what? I transferred my ownership. I looked down again. There it was. The deed. Only one name remained. Emily Carter. My name. Only mine. I shook my head. No. This can't be right. It's already been filed. But why would you do that? Because if something happened to me, I didn't want anyone to challenge your right to stay here. I frowned. What do you mean? He hesitated. My parents. The room went silent. Rachel looked confused. I thought your parents liked Emily. They do. They love her. Then what's the problem? Ethan leaned forward. They don't know about my diagnosis. And they can't know. Why not? Because my father already has plans. I stared at him. What plans? He wants me to move back home. He believes family property should stay in the family. If I die, he'll fight to keep everything. I felt my stomach tighten. You think your parents would take the house from me? I don't know. But I wasn't willing to take that chance. So I transferred everything before anyone could interfere. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. You did all this. Without telling me. I was trying to protect you. But you shut me out. I know. You lied. I know. You made me believe our marriage meant nothing. His voice cracked. I know. I stood up and walked toward the living room window. Outside, the neighborhood looked exactly the same. Kids were riding bicycles. A mail truck stopped across the street. A couple walked their dog. Ordinary life continued. Meanwhile, mine had completely fallen apart. Behind me, Ethan quietly spoke. The morning I handed you the suitcase, I turned around immediately. I wasn't throwing you out. I stared at him. What? The suitcase wasn't for you. I frowned. I don't understand. I packed it. For me. Every word felt unreal. I had another cardiac episode the night before. My heartbeat stopped. I collapsed in the garage. I didn't tell you. The cardiologist called first thing that morning. He wanted me admitted immediately. I felt my knees weaken. I thought I might not come back. So I packed a bag. I planned to leave before you woke up. I covered my mouth. But you came downstairs early. You saw the suitcase. You asked what was happening. I panicked. So instead of telling you the truth, I pushed you away. He closed his eyes. I wanted you to hate me. I thought anger would be easier for you than watching me disappear into another hospital. The memory came rushing back. That morning, his expression, his trembling hands, the untouched cup of coffee. I had been so focused on his words. I never noticed how pale he looked, or how carefully he was trying to stay on his feet. I slowly sank into the couch. For months, I had replayed that morning over and over in my head. I remembered every cruel word, every painful second, but somehow I had forgotten to remember his face. Not once had I asked myself why the strongest man I knew had looked so frightened. Because I had already decided I knew the answer. I had been wrong, terribly wrong. I looked at Ethan. So all this time, you were preparing me to live without you. He nodded. A single tear rolled down his face. I thought it was the last thing I could still do for the woman who saved my life. I reached for his hand. For the first time in months, neither of us said a word, because there was only one question left. Could a marriage survive the truth? After being nearly destroyed by the lies meant to protect it, neither of us spoke for what felt like forever. The silence between us wasn't empty. It was filled with everything we should have said months ago. I was the first to break it. You really believe pushing me away would protect me? Ethan nodded. I convinced myself it was the only way. You should have let me decide that. I know. I was scared. No. I shook my head. You were terrified. He looked down. I've never been afraid of dying. His voice cracked. I've been afraid of leaving you with nothing. I walked toward him slowly. You were never nothing. He covered his face with both hands. For the first time since I'd known him, I watched my husband completely fall apart. Not the quiet tears he'd hidden during unemployment. Not the frustration after another rejection email. This was different. Years of guilt poured out all at once. I'm sorry. He whispered it over and over. I'm so sorry. I thought if you hated me, you'd eventually move on. I thought you'd find someone better. I thought you'd stop waiting for me. I knelt in front of him. Ethan, look at me. Slowly he raised his head. I never wanted a perfect husband. I wanted an honest one. Those words hit him harder than anything else I'd said. A week later, we sat together in the cardiologist's office. For the first time, I was there. Not because I had discovered the truth on my own, because Ethan finally let me in. The doctor spread several test results across the desk. The medication appears to be helping. The latest imaging looks more stable than your previous scans. Ethan exhaled quietly. But this isn't a cure, the doctor continued. You'll need regular monitoring, lifestyle changes, and if you experience another episode, you come to the hospital immediately. No delays. No trying to be the hero. I reached over and squeezed Ethan's hand. We understand. As we walked back to the parking lot, neither of us said much. Then Ethan stopped beside the car. I don't deserve another chance. I looked at him. This isn't about what you deserve. It's about what we choose. And I'm choosing to fight with you. Not for you. With you. His eyes filled with tears again. Over the next few months, life changed in ways I never expected. I quit my second job. Not because Ethan asked me to. Because I finally allowed myself to rest. For the first time in years, I came home before sunset. I started cooking dinner because I wanted to, not because I was rushing to leave for another shift. We ate together almost every night. Sometimes we talked for hours. Sometimes we simply enjoyed the quiet. It felt strangely new, as if we were learning how to be husband and wife all over again. One Saturday afternoon, Rachel came over carrying a homemade apple pie. She looked at both of us sitting on the back porch. So, she smiled carefully. I guess I'm not allowed to hate him anymore. Ethan laughed for the first time in weeks. I probably still deserve it. Rachel pointed a finger at him. You do. But you've got exactly one chance. He nodded. I know. She looked at me. And you. What? No more pretending you're okay when you're not. I smiled. Deal. She hugged both of us before leaving. As I watched her drive away, I realized something. Healing wasn't dramatic. It wasn't one grand speech. Or one perfect apology. It was choosing, every single day, to stop carrying pain alone. Several months later, Ethan invited me to lunch downtown. The same cafe where I'd seen him with Olivia. The place where I thought my marriage had ended. When we walked inside, Olivia stood up to greet us. She smiled warmly. It's good to finally meet you properly. I laughed awkwardly. I owe you an apology. You don't owe me anything. I understand exactly what you thought. She handed me a folder. Everything has been finalized. Inside were updated legal documents. The trust, the investment account, the house. Every single document now included one additional requirement. All major financial decisions required both of our signatures. I looked at Ethan. He smiled. No more secrets. No more protecting each other by lying. From now on, we decide everything together. I reached across the table and took his hand. For the first time in a very long time, I believed him. But life still had one final surprise waiting for us. One that neither of us could have predicted. And unlike everything that came before, this surprise wouldn't test our marriage. It would remind us why we had fought so hard to save it. 1 year later, I stood in the same kitchen where our lives had nearly fallen apart. Sunlight poured through the windows. The coffee maker hummed softly. The house felt peaceful again. It amazed me how ordinary happiness looked. There were no dramatic speeches, no grand celebrations. Just two people who had finally learned that love could never survive where fear replaced honesty. Ethan walked into the kitchen, carrying 2 mugs of coffee. He smiled. "You're up early." I couldn't sleep. "You okay?" I nodded. "I was thinking." He sat across from me. "About what?" "Us." He laughed quietly. "That's a dangerous subject." I smiled. "It used to be. Now, it simply felt like home." The past year hadn't been easy. Ethan still had regular appointments with his cardiologist. Every 6 months came another round of scans, another stress test, another anxious week waiting for results. Every appointment reminded us that nothing in life was guaranteed. But something had changed. We faced every appointment together. If the doctor had bad news, we heard it together. If there was hope, we celebrated it together. There were no more secret folders, no hidden bank accounts, no mysterious meetings, no lies told in the name of protection. One afternoon, while cleaning the home office, I found the suitcase. The same black suitcase. The one I thought had been packed for me. I ran my hand across the handle. For months, that suitcase had represented rejection, abandonment, the end of my marriage. Now, it represented something entirely different. A frightened husband trying, in the worst possible way, to protect the woman he loved. I carried it downstairs. Ethan looked up from the couch. "I almost threw that away." I shook my head. "No. Keep it." "Why?" "Because we should never forget what almost destroyed us." He understood immediately. The suitcase wasn't our enemy. Silence was. That fall, Rachel invited us to Thanksgiving dinner. The house was filled with laughter, kids running through the hallway, the smell of roasted turkey and pumpkin pie. At one point, Rachel pulled me aside while everyone else watched football in the living room. "You look different." I laughed. "I've got more sleep now." "It's more than that." She smiled. "You don't look like you're carrying the whole world anymore." I looked across the room. Ethan caught my eye and smiled. For the first time in years, I wasn't carrying it alone. A few weeks before Christmas, Ethan surprised me. Not with jewelry, not with an expensive vacation. He handed me a small wrapped box. Inside was a simple silver keychain. Engraved on it were 6 words. "No more secrets. Always together." I looked at him. "You remembered. I'll spend the rest of my life remembering. I don't need promises anymore. I know. I just need honesty. You'll have it." Every single day. Sometimes people ask me how our marriage survived. They expect me to say love, or forgiveness, or faith. Those things mattered, but they weren't enough by themselves. Our marriage survived because we finally understood one painful truth. You cannot protect someone you love by taking away their right to face life beside you. Real love isn't carrying every burden alone. It isn't making impossible decisions for someone else's heart. Real love is allowing the person who chose you to keep choosing you, even on the hardest days. If Ethan had told me the truth from the beginning, I would have cried with him, sat beside him through every appointment, held his hand through every terrifying moment, not because it would have been easy, but because that's what we had promised each other on our wedding day. In sickness and in health, those words were never meant to belong to only one person. They belonged to both of us. Today, Ethan still takes his medication. He still goes to every checkup. Some days are harder than others. Life remains uncertain. But then again, whose life isn't? The difference is that now, whatever tomorrow brings, we'll face it together. And every once in a while, when I see that old black suitcase tucked away in the closet, I remember how close we came to losing everything. Not because of illness, not because of money, not because of betrayal, but because 2 people who loved each other forgot that the strongest marriages aren't built on perfect sacrifices. They're built on shared truth.